My cousin called and said, "I need you to say you've never seen me drink." I showed the court videos of her passed out while her kids cried. Stephanie's voice on the phone was shaking when she asked me to lie for her. "Claire, please. The custody hearing is next week and I need character witnesses. Just tell the judge you've never seen me drink. That's all." I held the phone away from my ear and stared at it like it had grown teeth. My cousin Stephanie, who I'd watched spiral into alcoholism for the past 3 years, wanted me to commit perjury. I laughed without humor. "Steph, I can't do that. You know I can't do that." Her voice turned desperate. "My ex-husband is trying to take Lucas and Maddie away from me. He's telling the court I'm an unfit mother. He's lying about everything and I need people to back me up." I thought about her 2 kids, Lucas who was 6 and Maddie who was 4. I thought about Christmas 2 years ago when Stephanie passed out on my bathroom floor while the kids cried in the living room. "Stephanie, maybe Nathan has a point. The drinking has gotten really bad." She hung up on me. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time it was my Aunt Diane, Stephanie's mother. "Claire, what did you say to upset Stephanie? She's in tears saying you won't help her keep her children." I explained as gently as possible that Stephanie had asked me to lie under oath. Aunt Diane got quiet for a moment, then said something that made my blood run cold. "Sometimes we have to protect family, Claire, even if it means bending the truth a little." I told Aunt Diane I wasn't going to commit perjury for anyone, family or not. She called me selfish and hung up. The next day, Stephanie showed up at my apartment unannounced. She looked terrible, her hair unwashed and her eyes bloodshot. Behind her stood Nathan, her ex-husband, holding Lucas and Maddie's hands. The kids looked scared and confused. Nathan spoke before Stephanie could. "Claire, I'm sorry to involve you, but I need to ask you something directly. Have you witnessed Stephanie drinking around the children?" I looked at Stephanie, whose eyes were pleading with me to lie. Then I looked at Lucas and Maddie, who deserved better than what they'd been living through. "Yes," I said quietly. "Multiple times." Stephanie's face crumpled, and she started screaming at me right there in my doorway. Nathan ushered the kids back toward his car while Stephanie called me every name she could think of. She told me I'd just destroyed her life, that I was a traitor, that she'd never forgive me. I closed the door and listened to her scream from the hallway for another 5 minutes before she finally left. I felt sick, but I also felt like I'd done the right thing. 2 days later, I received a subpoena. Nathan's lawyer had added me to the witness list for the custody hearing. The document came with a note explaining that my testimony could be crucial in establishing a pattern of alcohol abuse in Stephanie's home. The guilt hit me in waves. Stephanie and I had been close growing up. She was only 3 years older than me, and we'd spent summers together at our grandmother's house in Vermont. She'd been the fun cousin, the one who taught me how to skateboard and sneak out after curfew. But somewhere in her late 20s, after her marriage started falling apart, the drinking started. At first, it was just wine with dinner. Then it was wine with lunch. Then it was vodka in the morning. I'd watched her transform from a vibrant, loving mother into someone who could barely function. The week before the hearing, Stephanie started a campaign against me. She posted on social media about family betrayal, never naming me directly but making it obvious who she meant. My phone filled with messages from relatives I barely knew, calling me judgmental and cruel. My Uncle Paul sent a long text about how alcoholism was a disease and I should have compassion. My grandmother called crying, begging me to reconsider testifying. Only my own mother supported me. She told me quietly that she'd been worried about Stephanie for years but hadn't known how to help. "Those children need protection," Mom said. "You're doing the right thing even if it doesn't feel like it." The custody hearing was scheduled for Thursday morning at the county courthouse. I took the day off work and arrived 30 minutes early, my stomach churning with anxiety. Nathan was already there with his lawyer, a sharp-looking woman named Victoria Brennan. She shook my hand and thanked me for coming. "I know this isn't easy," she said. "Testifying against family never is. But your testimony could make the difference for those kids." Stephanie arrived 10 minutes before the hearing started, flanked by Aunt Diane and Uncle Paul. She glared at me across the hallway with such hatred that I had to look away. Her lawyer was a young man who looked fresh out of law school, probably the only attorney she could afford. Judge Robert Henshaw called the courtroom to order at 9 a.m. sharp. He was an older man with white hair and a stern expression that suggested he'd seen every variation of family drama imaginable. Nathan testified first about Stephanie's drinking. He described coming home early from work one day to find her passed out on the couch while Lucas, who was 3 at the time, had climbed onto the kitchen counter trying to make himself lunch. He talked about the time Maddie had fallen down the stairs and Stephanie had been too drunk to drive her to the hospital. Nathan had rushed home from work to take his daughter to the emergency room himself. Stephanie's lawyer tried to paint Nathan as vindictive, claiming he was exaggerating isolated incidents to win custody out of spite. But Nathan remained calm and provided dates, medical records, and witness statements from neighbors. Then it was Stephanie's turn to testify. She took the stand wearing a conservative dress and minimal makeup, clearly trying to look like a responsible mother. Her lawyer asked her about her relationship with alcohol. "I enjoy a glass of wine occasionally," Stephanie said, her voice steady. "But the idea that I'm some kind of alcoholic is absurd. Nathan is lying because he wants to hurt me." Her lawyer asked if she'd ever been intoxicated around the children. "Never," Stephanie said firmly. "I would never put my children at risk like that." The lie was so blatant that I felt my hands curl into fists. Her lawyer asked about her parenting. Stephanie painted a picture of herself as a devoted mother who read bedtime stories and volunteered at school events. She cried while describing how much she loved Lucas and Maddie. It was a convincing performance if you didn't know the truth. When Victoria stood to cross-examine Stephanie, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted. Victoria asked Stephanie about specific dates that Nathan had documented. Christmas Eve 2 years ago, when neighbors called the police for a wellness check, Stephanie claimed she'd just been sleeping. Victoria asked about the time CPS had been called after Lucas showed up at school saying his mommy wouldn't wake up. Stephanie said Lucas had misunderstood the situation, that she'd been sick with the flu. Victoria asked if Stephanie had ever driven with the children while impaired. Stephanie hesitated for just a second too long before saying no. Victoria pulled out a police report from 8 months ago. Stephanie had been pulled over at 3 p.m. on a Wednesday with both kids in the car. The officer had noted the smell of alcohol, but Stephanie had refused a breathalyzer test. She'd been let go with a warning because the officer couldn't prove impairment without the test. Stephanie's face went red as she tried to explain that she'd had wine with lunch hours earlier. Victoria asked why she'd refused the breathalyzer if she was sober. Stephanie stammered that she'd been afraid and didn't understand her rights. The judge made a note, his expression unreadable. After lunch recess, Victoria called me to the stand. I swore to tell the truth with my hand on the Bible while Stephanie stared daggers at me from her table. Victoria asked me to state my relationship to Stephanie. I explained we were cousins who'd been close growing up. Victoria asked if I'd witnessed Stephanie drinking around her children. I took a breath and said yes, multiple times over the past 3 years. I described Christmas 2 years ago when Stephanie had brought the kids to my apartment for dinner. She'd arrived already drunk, stumbling and slurring her words. By 8 p.m., she'd passed out on my bathroom floor while Lucas and Maddie watched television in my living room, asking when Mommy would wake up. I described another incident 6 months ago, when I'd stopped by Stephanie's house unannounced to drop off some mail that had been delivered to my address by mistake. It was 2 p.m. on a Saturday. I'd found Stephanie unconscious on the couch, an empty vodka bottle on the coffee table, while Lucas tried to make sandwiches for himself and Maddie. The little boy had been so matter-of-fact about it, telling me that Mommy was taking a nap and would wake up later. I'd stayed for 2 hours until Stephanie came to, and when I'd tried to talk to her about the drinking, she'd screamed at me to mind my own business. Stephanie's lawyer tried to discredit me during cross-examination. He suggested I was biased because Nathan had asked me to testify. He implied I was exaggerating or misremembering events. He asked if I had any proof of what I was claiming. That's when I pulled out my phone. Actually, I said, I do. The courtroom went silent. I explained that after the incident 6 months ago, I'd become so worried about Lucas and Maddie that I'd started documenting what I saw. I had videos. Judge Henshaw asked to see them. Victoria connected my phone to the courtroom's display system. The first video showed Stephanie's living room from the perspective of someone standing in the doorway. The timestamp read 3:15 p.m. on a Saturday afternoon 3 months ago. In the video, Stephanie was sprawled on the couch, clearly unconscious, her mouth hanging open. Lucas sat on the floor next to her, shaking her arm and saying, "Mommy, wake up. Maddie's hungry." Maddie, just 4 years old, stood by the couch crying. Lucas kept shaking his mother, his small voice getting more desperate. "Mommy, please wake up. We're hungry." The video ran for 2 minutes. Stephanie never moved. Finally, Lucas gave up and led his crying sister toward the kitchen. The courtroom was completely silent when the video ended. I saw 2 of the jurors wiping their eyes. Stephanie's face had gone white. There were 3 more videos. In one, taken through a window because I'd been dropping off groceries and gotten worried by how quiet the house was, Stephanie was passed out at the kitchen table at 5 p.m. while the kids ate cereal for dinner. In another, recorded at a family barbecue at my parents' house, Stephanie was slumped in a lawn chair, barely conscious, while Lucas tried to get her attention because Maddie had fallen and scraped her knee. The last video was the most damning. It showed Stephanie getting into her car with both kids in the backseat, clearly intoxicated. She fumbled with her keys, dropping them twice before managing to start the engine. I'd followed them, ready to call the police, but she'd only driven 2 blocks to the grocery store. I'd called Nathan instead, and he'd come to pick up the kids. When the videos finished, Judge Henshaw asked if there were any more witnesses. Victoria said no. Stephanie's lawyer looked shell-shocked, clearly unprepared for video evidence. The judge called a 30-minute recess to review everything. During the break, Aunt Diane cornered me in the hallway. "How could you?" she hissed. "How could you do this to your own cousin? You've destroyed her." I met her eyes and said quietly, "Stephanie destroyed herself. I'm just trying to protect those kids." Uncle Paul stood behind Aunt Diane, looking torn. He'd always been the reasonable one, the uncle who taught me how to change a tire and helped me move into my first apartment. He said something that surprised me. "Diane, maybe Claire is right. Maybe the kids do need to be with Nathan." Aunt Diane turned on him, but he held up his hand. "I've been watching Stephanie spiral for years, and we've all pretended it wasn't happening. Those videos don't lie." When court resumed, Judge Henshaw delivered his ruling from the bench rather than taking it under advisement. He said the evidence presented, particularly the video documentation, showed a clear pattern of alcohol abuse that created an unsafe environment for minor children. He was granting Nathan primary physical custody effective immediately. Stephanie would receive supervised visitation only 2 hours every other Saturday until she completed an inpatient treatment program and could provide 6 months of verified sobriety. She would also be required to attend AA meetings and submit to random drug and alcohol testing. If she failed to comply with any of these requirements, her visitation rights would be suspended entirely. Stephanie started screaming before the judge had even finished. "This isn't fair. You're taking my babies away. I'm their mother." The bailiff had to physically restrain her as she lunged toward Nathan's table. Judge Henshaw banged his gavel and warned that any further outbursts would result in contempt charges. Stephanie collapsed into her chair, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. I felt a complex mix of emotions watching her fall apart. Part of me ached for her, for the cousin I'd loved who'd been consumed by addiction. But mostly I felt relief that Lucas and Maddie would finally be safe. After the hearing, Nathan approached me outside the courtroom. Lucas and Maddie were with his mother, who'd been watching them during the proceedings. "Thank you," Nathan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I know that wasn't easy, but you might have saved their lives." He told me that just 2 weeks ago, he'd gotten a call from a neighbor saying Stephanie had been passed out in her front yard while the kids played unsupervised near the street. He'd been documenting everything, building his case, but my videos had provided the concrete proof the court needed. I asked if I could see Lucas and Maddie. Nathan hesitated, then nodded. "They ask about you. They miss you." We walked to where his mother sat with the kids in the courthouse lobby. Lucas saw me first and his face lit up. "Aunt Claire!" He ran over and hugged my waist. Maddie followed, more tentative but still reaching for my hand. I knelt down to their level. "Hey guys, how are you doing?" Lucas said. "Dad says we're going to live with him now. Is Mommy going to be okay?" I looked up at Nathan, who nodded permission for me to answer honestly. "Your mom is sick right now," I told Lucas. "But she's going to get help so she can get better. And you and Maddie are going to stay with your dad where you'll be safe." Maddie asked, "Can we still see you?" That question broke something in me. I promised them yes, that we'd do something fun soon, maybe go to the zoo or the children's museum. They seemed satisfied with that answer. After saying goodbye to the kids, I drove home feeling emotionally wrung out. My phone had been buzzing constantly during the drive. Dozens of messages from family members, most of them angry. My Aunt Diane had apparently told everyone in the family what I'd done, painting me as the villain who'd destroyed Stephanie's life out of spite. The next few weeks were brutal. Half my family stopped speaking to me. At my grandmother's 80-year-old birthday party, Aunt Diane made a scene, loudly telling anyone who would listen that I was a traitor who'd testified against my own blood. Uncle Paul pulled me aside and apologized for his wife's behavior. "She's in denial about Stephanie's problems," he said quietly. "But I want you to know that I think you did the right thing. Those kids deserved better." My mother stood by me throughout everything, which helped. She'd worked as a social worker for 30 years and had seen too many cases where family loyalty came before child safety. "Those kids were in danger," she told me firmly. "Anyone who can't see that is part of the problem." 2 months after the custody hearing, I got an unexpected call from Stephanie. She was calling from an inpatient rehabilitation center in the mountains, 3 hours away. Her voice was different, clearer somehow, without the fog of alcohol. "Claire, I need to apologize," she said. "I've been in treatment for 6 weeks now, and I'm starting to see how bad things really were." I didn't know what to say. She continued, "I watched those videos in group therapy. My counselor made me watch them and really look at what I was doing to my kids. I saw Lucas trying to wake me up while Maddie cried, and I wanted to die." She told me that her first 3 weeks in rehab had been spent in denial, insisting everyone was overreacting, that she had everything under control. But her therapist had challenged her to watch the videos from court objectively, as if they were about a stranger. When I watched them like that, I finally saw what you all saw. I saw a drunk woman passed out while her children begged for attention. I saw myself putting my kids in danger over and over. Stephanie said she was finally ready to do the work. She was in a 90-day program and planned to go directly into a sober living facility after that. She was attending daily AA meetings and working with a sponsor. She said she understood now why Judge Henshaw had given Nathan custody. "I was so angry at you," Stephanie said. "I thought you'd betrayed me in the worst way possible. But my therapist helped me understand that you were the only person who loved me enough to tell the truth. Everyone else was enabling me." I asked how she was really doing. She admitted it was the hardest thing she'd ever done, that she'd spent the first week detoxing and feeling like she wanted to die, that facing what she'd become was almost unbearable. But she said she was committed to getting better, to becoming the mother Lucas and Maddie deserved. We talked for almost an hour. By the end, I believed she was finally serious about recovery. She asked if I thought Nathan would eventually let her have unsupervised visitation if she stayed sober. I told her honestly that it would take time and consistent proof, but that Nathan wanted the kids to have a relationship with their mother. "He's not trying to punish you," I said. "He just wants them safe." 3 months after that call, Stephanie completed her inpatient program and moved into a sober living house with 6 other women in recovery. She got a job at a coffee shop and started rebuilding her life from scratch. She attended her supervised visits with Lucas and Maddie religiously, never missing one. Nathan told me the visits were going well. The kids were hesitant at first, but slowly warming up to their mother again. Stephanie played games with them, helped with homework during visits, and most importantly, stayed sober. She passed every random drug test. She had 6 months of verified sobriety, then 9 months, then a year. Judge Henshaw agreed to modify the custody order, allowing Stephanie unsupervised day visits under specific conditions. No overnight stays yet, but she could pick up the kids on Saturday mornings and have them until evening. Nathan had to approve all activities, and Stephanie had to check in via text every 2 hours. The first unsupervised visit was at a local park. I happened to be there with a friend's kids and saw Stephanie with Lucas and Maddie. She looked different, healthier, with clear eyes and genuine smiles. She was pushing Maddie on the swings while Lucas climbed the jungle gym. When Lucas called out to show her something, she responded immediately, fully present in a way she hadn't been in years. She saw me watching and waved tentatively. I waved back. After the kids ran off to the slide, Stephanie walked over. "Thank you for being here that day," she said. "At the courthouse. Thank you for showing those videos even though you knew what it would cost you." I told her I'd do it again, that Lucas and Maddie deserved a mother who was present and sober. She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm working on being that mother. Every single day, I'm working on it." We didn't become close again, not like we'd been before. Too much had happened. Too much trust had been broken. But we were civil at family gatherings, and eventually, some of the family members who'd shunned me began to come around. Aunt Diane never apologized, but she stopped actively attacking me. Uncle Paul made a point of telling me at every holiday that I'd saved those kids' lives. 2 years after the custody hearing, Stephanie reached another milestone, 18 months of continuous sobriety. Judge Henshaw agreed to expand her custody time. She could now have the kids overnight on weekends, alternating with Nathan. It was still supervised in the sense that she had to check in and couldn't take them out of state, but she was getting closer to equal shared custody. Nathan told me privately that he was proud of Stephanie's progress. "I never wanted to keep the kids from their mother," he said. "I just wanted them safe, and now they are." Lucas and Maddie were thriving. Lucas had started 3rd grade and was doing well academically. Maddie was in kindergarten and had made friends easily. They still remembered the dark times when their mother had been drinking, but they were healing. Their therapist reported that both kids were processing their trauma in healthy ways, and that having a sober mother who was actively working on her recovery was helping them understand that addiction was an illness, not a character flaw. At Stephanie's 3-year sobriety celebration at her AA meeting, she asked me to attend. I sat in a church basement folding chair while she stood in front of 30 people and told her story. She talked about hitting rock bottom, about losing custody of her children, about watching videos of herself passed out while her kids cried. "My cousin saved my life," Stephanie said, looking directly at me. She could have stayed silent. She could have lied for me like I asked, but she loved my children more than she feared my anger, and that's what real love looks like. She received her 3-year chip to thunderous applause. Afterward, people came up to thank her for sharing her story. A young woman with 2 months of sobriety told Stephanie that hearing about her journey gave her hope. An older man who'd lost custody of his kids said he was inspired to fight for his recovery the way Stephanie had fought for hers. On the drive home, I thought about how close Stephanie had come to losing everything permanently, how easily those kids could have been seriously hurt or worse because of her drinking, how the system had failed to intervene until I'd provided undeniable evidence. I thought about all the families where no one speaks up, where everyone enables the addiction until tragedy strikes. The next morning, I got a text from Stephanie with a photo attached. It showed her with Lucas and Maddie at a park, all 3 of them smiling genuinely. The caption read, "3 years ago, I almost lost them forever. Today, we're building new memories. Thank you for loving them enough to tell the truth." I saved that photo. It reminded me that sometimes the hardest choices are the right ones, that protecting children has to come before protecting feelings, that real love means telling difficult truths, even when it costs you relationships. Judge Henshaw eventually granted Stephanie shared physical custody when she reached 5 years of sobriety. Lucas was 11, Maddie was 9, and they split their time equally between their parents' homes. Stephanie continued to work her program, sponsoring other women in recovery and building a life she was proud of. She never touched alcohol again, not once. Nathan remarried a kind woman who treated Lucas and Maddie well, and Stephanie was gracious about the new stepmom, recognizing that Nathan deserved happiness too. The family dynamic wasn't traditional, but it worked because everyone prioritized the kids' well-being over their own egos. At Lucas's middle school graduation, all the adults who loved him sat together in the auditorium, Nathan and his wife on one side, Stephanie on the other, with me and my mother in between. Lucas gave a speech about resilience and second chances, and I saw Stephanie crying quietly. After the ceremony, Lucas hugged his mother tight and told her he was proud of her. She held him and said, "I'm proud of you too, baby, and I'm so sorry for the years I missed." Maddie tugged at my sleeve and said something that made everything worthwhile. "Aunt Claire, you know what my teacher asked us to write about? She said to write about someone who's a hero. I wrote about you." I knelt down and asked her why. She said simply, "Because you made sure we were safe when Mommy was sick. You told the truth even though people were mad at you. That's what heroes do." 10 years after I showed those videos in court, Stephanie celebrated a decade of sobriety. Lucas was 16, Maddie was 14, and they both spoke at her AA meeting about what it meant to have a sober mother. They talked about the hard years, the confusion and fear they'd felt as small children, but they also talked about watching their mother fight for recovery and how that taught them about strength and commitment. Stephanie told me later that night that making amends to her children had been the hardest and most important thing she'd ever done, that looking them in the eyes and apologizing for the damage her drinking had caused had nearly broken her, but it had also healed something fundamental in their relationship. She said they'd never forget what happened, but they'd forgiven her, which was more than she'd ever dared hope for. At Maddie's 8th grade graduation, she gave a speech about resilience that brought the whole audience to tears. She talked about growing up with a parent in recovery, about learning that addiction is a disease but that recovery is possible. She thanked her father for keeping her safe and her mother for doing the hard work of getting sober. She ended by saying, "My family doesn't look like other families, but it's mine, and I wouldn't trade it for anything." The family relationships I'd damaged by testifying slowly repaired over the years. Aunt Diane eventually admitted she'd been in denial about her daughter's addiction. Uncle Paul thanked me at every opportunity for having the courage to speak up. My grandmother, in her final years, told me she was proud of the stand I'd taken even when it had been difficult. The extended family still had scars from that custody battle, but time and Stephanie's continued sobriety had healed most of them. Stephanie and I rebuilt a friendship, different from what we'd had before, but genuine. We had coffee every few months, and she'd update me on the kids and her recovery. She was working as a counselor at the same rehab center where she'd gotten sober, helping other mothers who'd lost custody fight to get their children back. She said my videos had been the wake-up call she'd needed but wouldn't have gotten if I'd protected her from the truth. Years later, when Lucas was applying to colleges, he wrote his admissions essay about growing up in a house with addiction and how it shaped his view of accountability and courage. He wrote about the custody battle and the day in court when videos were shown that changed everything. He wrote about his Aunt Claire, who'd loved him enough to tell the truth when lying would have been easier. He got into every school he applied to, and at his high school graduation, he thanked me publicly for being someone he could count on when his world was falling apart. Stephanie hugged me after the ceremony and said, "You gave me my life back by taking away the thing I was using to destroy it. That's a gift I can never repay." I told her the best repayment was watching her be the mother Lucas and Maddie deserved. She'd done that for a decade now, showing up sober and present for every school event, every birthday, every ordinary Tuesday evening. She'd proven that recovery was possible and that people could change if they wanted it badly enough. Maddie started high school as a confident young woman who'd processed her childhood trauma with professional help and family support. She'd told me once that she barely remembered the worst of her mother's drinking, but that she remembered me being there when things were scary. That knowing at least one adult was watching out for her had made her feel less alone. She'd internalized the lesson that speaking truth, even difficult truth, was an act of love, not betrayal. The family's story became one we told at gatherings, as a reminder that intervention, even painful intervention, could save lives. That enabling someone's addiction out of misplaced loyalty wasn't love. It was cowardice dressed up as kindness. That protecting children had to be the priority, even when it cost relationships. Stephanie used her story in her work at the treatment center, showing newly admitted patients the videos from court with their permission, demonstrating what rock bottom looked like. She told them that the people who love you most will sometimes have to hurt your feelings to save your life. That her cousin showing those videos had been the greatest act of love anyone had ever shown her, even though she'd hated me for it at the time. 10 years after showing those videos, I attended Lucas's high school graduation party at Nathan's house. Stephanie was there with her boyfriend of 3 years, a man she'd met at an AA meeting who had 6 years of sobriety himself. They were talking about marriage, about building a life together grounded in recovery and honesty. Lucas was headed to college on a full academic scholarship. Maddie was thriving in high school, already talking about studying social work to help families like hers. And Stephanie, my cousin who I'd testified against in court, stood next to me watching her children with clear eyes and genuine joy. She turned to me and said, "Thank you for showing those videos. Thank you for loving my children enough to tell the truth even when it cost you. You gave them their mother back by forcing me to face what I'd become." I watched Lucas and Maddie laughing with their friends, healthy and whole, and knew that every angry phone call, every family member who'd stopped speaking to me, every moment of doubt had been worth it. Sometimes love means telling the truth that everyone else is too afraid to speak. Sometimes it means showing videos that destroy someone's case. Sometimes it means choosing children's safety over adult comfort. And sometimes, years later, the person you testified against thanks you for saving her life by refusing to lie. That's what real love looks like. If you enjoyed this, you'll definitely want to see the next ones too. So subscribe now and let me know your take in the comments.